Okay, well, welcome everybody. I think we have our technical difficulties ironed out by now. And if not, please let us know in the help channel if you are having an issue. But I'd like to introduce Rose. Rose is a pediatric home health registered nurse in Bellingham, Washington. She's Catholic and was raised on a love of Star Trek and Tolkien that grew into a love for writing and creative craft. She's an awesome writer. She also graduated with a Bachelor's of Science in Nursing from Franciscan University and completed the Honors Great Books program, which she mentioned, I think, in the Geek Out series. Rose is also a member of our board, and we are super happy to have her. I'm very excited for her talk today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tanya. I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully you won't get any notifications popping up that pop up on my end. I don't know how to turn off YouTube notifications, so I sound like an old person, but let's prepare Chrome real quick. Nope. Let's get to the, yeah, hello everyone. I have a presentation prepared. Let's see. No, that's not what I want. I'm sorry. Some minor technical hiccups here. You should be able to see the presentation now. And then I'm gonna hit present. How's that? Okay.
Looks good.
All right, awesome. So I'm gonna move myself to the side so I can read a little bit more of the slides. So I kind of cheekily named this Bacta, the future, because I am talking a lot about medical technology and some of it being Star Wars medical technology. And yeah, I'm a nurse. Yeah, so without further ado, let's get started. Click. There we go. Okay, so this is a bit of an inside joke. Hopefully any nurses out there get this. Every nursing presentation ever begins with a list of objectives, things I want you to learn in the presentation. But this is not a very formal setting, so our presentations, our objectives are just, we want to be moral, we want to be ethical, Okay. And also Bacta is really cool. That's something that I learned this week. So without further ado, let us launch into famous instances of medical tech in sci-fi. We're going to begin with so I want to preface by saying that I love all of the examples that I'm talking about, and I think they're great works of fiction, but I am critiquing a little bit of some inaccuracies they have, but it's sci-fi, right? Like, we all know it's not real. So it's just sort of, if you want to do more realistic stuff, like there's just some things I don't buy as a nurse. I'm like, well, that's not possible. You could do that, but you could have to do it differently, is basically what I'm saying. All right, so first section, sci-fi prosthetics. It's fun, you guys. Okay, this is a famous example. It's Luke Skywalker's hand after it gets cut off. I love what they did with this because from a prop standpoint, it's really quite simple because they didn't have to give him a fake hand when he already had a hand. They would just like show this and like, oh, his prosthetic hand is so real that you can't tell the difference unless you open the latch and poke around with the wiring. Obviously, real prosthetics are not at this level yet, and the biggest limitation is the sensory integration of the prosthetic. You can make a hand that looks realistic. You can make a hand where you can even paint the fingernails, but you can't feel with that hand. You can't put a lot of weight on it. There's still a lot of limitations, but it's cool. So it's sci-fi. And next slide. So there's good things about these. Here's a couple other examples. This is Voltron from Shiro from Voltron Legendary Defender, and Hiccup from How to Train Your Dragon. I was just like, I need people who've lost limbs. And so here's some examples. Voltron's hand is Shiro's hand is attached to his body, if you're not familiar. It is like fused in, and you can you see it's lit up here. It has a burning capability. But Hiccup, his prosthetic is detachable. So great things about these. They're cool, techy. They enhance the abilities of the person wearing the prosthetic. The most problematic thing about some sci-fi prosthetics is that they're never removed. This is a problem. This is not a limitation of the prosthetic. This is a limitation of the human body. Skin needs to breathe, you guys. There's a reason we like to change our clothes. Like, come on, like skin needs to breathe. So the infection risk of just leaving something attached to your skin, especially something that's not breathable, like a prosthetic, is just, it's just a limitation of the human body. It's not something we can really work around. And I get a little bit more into the next slide, we see Bucky, the Winter Soldier. You see his metal. This is just like an image to show the example, but it's, I think, presumably fused with his body. The metal goes into his skin. There are all kinds of problems with that. You can see at the bottom, I have a note, which I'm going to have to move the Zoom thing. Yeah, so this is fused with the skin, then why does it look so nice? Things crust. I've worked with people who have metal poking out of their body for periods of time, just because of surgical needs. And I do get into like when that is done in modern day medicine and what it looks like and how it affects things. That's the next slide. But your skin is going to try and heal over that metal just constantly. So you're going to have scabbing, you're going to have crusting, you're going to have flaking, you're going to have just like chunks of flesh. You know, they're pretty small, but it's kind of gross. And so it's not going to look nice. It's not going to be pleasant. And it's not going to be a strong fused arm that you can like sock somebody with. That's not a technology we have yet. So, and I'm not sure it's a technology we're ever going to have to this extent because of the limitations on the human body. But you could have a cool prosthetic if, say, Bucky had more of his arm. If he was, I don't know if you can see my mouse. If he had like still has some elbow, he could still do everything with his arm and be super powered, or maybe even if it wasn't above the elbow amputation, you know, but like the whole arm, that limits you a lot. But I do want to not limit our imaginations and what we think, because I have more on this later about how sci-fi inspiring what developments we choose to like seek and make is an important thing, and I don't want to limit that. This is supposed to be like kind of humorous, you guys, about like, well, things crust, you know, it just happens. So can prosthetics like these be done? Well, as I've said, not as pictured. So even with infinite technology, the human body still has limitations. That's the big thing that I want to like draw home, is that you would have to really enhance. I don't even know what you would do. You would have maybe you could come with a material that the body thinks is its own skin, but that would be so specific to each person, because you'd have to go down to like the makeup of it being different, because bodies like reject skin grafts sometimes that are like other people's skin, or you know, some bodies will like, it would be intense. So I just want everyone to think a little bit about that. The ethics of prosthetics, I will say, is not super controversial. It's obviously bad if you like I think Shiro from Legendary Defender, they like the enemy, the Galra, cut off his arm and then put on a new one. I think something similar happened to Bucky, but it's been a while since I've seen Winter Soldier. So that is not ethical. We know this, but like if like Luke Skywalker losing a hand in a battle and then getting a new one, that's not an ethical issue, of course. Yeah. So the skin does not like metal implanted in it. I have a picture next. It's not that, I would say it's not that gross, but I'm going to warn you that there's some red inflamed skin around metal skeletal pins that have been implanted. And I won't stay on the screen too long. So if you don't like it, just ignore it. Okay, here it is. These are skeletal pins. These are a little bit more red than you want them to be. You're wondering about infection, but you can see some of the crusting, you can see some of the redness, and that just happens when you have skin that's trying to heal and can't. The reason, I'll get off the screen in case it's grossing anybody out. So this is a picture of what these pins are used for in today's medicine. It's not used a lot because you need a really, really complex fracture to merit the infection risk of having something protruding from your body. Because these pins, they go, I'll just use my arm as an example, I don't know if you can even see my mouth. They go into the bone, and then say if your arm was like really complexly fractured, it's just completely shattered, the pins will hold it together, and then you see these metal weights at the end of the bed are putting pressure on the bone to pull it together so that it heals properly, so that person can walk again or use their hand again or whatever the situation will be. You see this dramatic picture of a person lying in bed with their leg up and all their limbs stretched out, and it's not always skeletal pinning in the picture. It's usually they have a cast, like I'm thinking of The Incredibles right now. the first Incredibles when that guy gets thrown through all the walls and then is in a full body cast. But yeah, so there's a lot of risk to skeletal pins. So they're done only when they absolutely need to be done, when no other way of fixing the fracture will be productive. So this is a little picture about that. So this is I just wanted to drive this point home. Prosthetics need to be removable because otherwise it's a pain, literally. Even think about Rocket Raccoon with that I didn't put a picture of this in here, but he has like metal sticking out of his back. That would be a pain because it's on his back. He can't clean it himself. It would be really rough on, poor Rocket. But that's the point of that image of him with the metal sticking out of his back that is seen when they're imprisoned together in the first Guardians of the Galaxy. The point of it is Rocket has been tortured, Rocket has been altered. It is not good. So I guess that's justifiable when you think about like how infected that would get and how it could lead to, because presumably it goes into the bone, right? I don't know why else you have metal sticking out of the skin if you're not trying to access something lower down in the skin. Maybe there's stuff, I'm not a doctor, but yeah, it's just a big infection risk you worry about bacteria getting between the pin and the skin and through the muscle and into the bloodstream. And then once bacteria is in the bloodstream, you have white blood cells to fight it off. But they're already working on the bacteria that gets in when you like brush your teeth and all sorts of other things. Bacteria gets into your bloodstream like throughout the day. They're working on that. If you get too many in because you have an implanted device, you go into sepsis. And then if you don't get proper medical technology and like vancomycin or other like really heavy hitting antibiotics, you can die, and that's not good, and that's bad. All right, so I just want to emphasize how much care and cleaning metal implants require, because as a nurse, I've had to take care of them in some settings, and they're just a pain, and it's not ideal, and it's a risk for infection. And yeah, I just don't know how many of these writers know this kind of stuff, and it's kind of funny. It just amuses me deeply. But again, all the charity in the world to these writers. They are creating good fiction. Okay, so here we go on to something a little less critiquey. This is Bacta, which I will get into what it is. This is a Bacta tank from Star Wars. You might be familiar with this image of Luke Skywalker after he gets attacked in episode 6. He's put in a Bacta tank and he recovers that way. It's also, the Bacta tank is prominently featured in the Book of Boba Fett, which I haven't finished, which I'm not caught up on, but I watched some of it. Yeah, so my question when I was doing research for this presentation was, what on earth is Bacta? Well, I went to Wikipedia and I got an answer, and it was a bunch of technobabble. Bacta was a mixture of cavum and alizai bacteria combined with ambroid fluid and a type of barley known as Bractixia renanchus. So that's technobabble. That's its own thing. But what does Bacta do? It promotes rapid regeneration of organic compounds, and it can be used in a variety of both critical and non-critical medical situations. Warm to the touch, Bacta liquid can aid in the healing of concussions, internal organ damage, and broken ribs. Furthermore, it can be placed in small dishes to help remove fingernails, mend cuts, burns, and other injuries. Due to its one-size-fits-all use in medical applications, it was a highly prized and commonly used medical treatment for most, if not all, injuries. Bacta could also knit together broken bones. Wow, that's a lot, you guys. But also, we got a technobabble there. So what is Bacta again? Basically, to sum that up, it's an organism derived from a kind of barley, which is kind of random, that repairs tissues without causing infection. That's a lot taken based on what I know of bacteria. So I guess it's just a helpful E. coli, which is really nice. But it's sci-fi, right? We'll take cool tech. That's awesome. And if we had something like Bacta today, it would revolutionize medicine. Think about like a one-size-fits-all treatment. Something that in Mandalorian, it was just sprayed on a head wound, Mando's head wound, and he just recovered. He was like, it healed his brain damage, his skull fracture, his bleeding, like whatever was going on. They didn't even need imaging. Like today we need imaging to figure out what's going on so we can fix the problem. They didn't even need imaging. They just let the Bacta work. That's pretty incredible. So hopefully, we discover some magical extraplanetary barley soon. So this is my one nitpick about Bacta tanks. It's really shallow, you guys. I just think that it's really hard to fall asleep and not breathe through your nose. So are we sure that Boba doesn't need like a nose clip or like a mask that goes over his nose or something? He's underwater, you guys. You don't want to inhale water. That's how you drown. I know it's not even water, it's Bacta, right? So, I mean, maybe it wouldn't hurt if you inhaled it. Maybe it would just give you better lungs. But like, I don't know. I don't know, man. I'm just thinking about noses here. And then another nose nitpick is Dune. This is a really funny one. How is the silk suit nose piece staying on? You know, I've dealt a lot with nose pieces that do stay in the nose that are behind both ears, and those things fall out all the time. So I just am wondering how is the thing designed in the nose, in the nostrils? What is it doing? How is it staying on? Because it's just under one ear. Like, I feel like it would fall out. But anyway, we're just ignoring the fact that dry noses are uncomfortable and bleed. But we are acknowledging that it's awesome that the author of Dune acknowledged that insensible loss of moisture that we all have every day. Insensible loss being the term for the moisture that is lost through your breath, through your sweat, anything that's not measurable in output, like when you pee and stuff, that or vomit. Like those are measurable things. You can actually like measure them in a cylinder. I know it's gross, but I'm a nurse. I do that all the time, measuring stuff that you probably want to just throw away. And yeah, so it's called insensible loss when you lose through sweat or your nose or your mouth, because you're not measuring that kind of stuff. So it's a cool thought, then awareness of what the body does. But I think this kind of fit would be a little bit better just behind both ears. Obviously there's no still suits behind both ears picture that I could just grab, but this is a nasal cannula for O2 delivery. Yeah, that's gonna stay on better. So other sci-fi medicine instances, just to go over briefly. I didn't go over the ethics of the last two, but I have another slide on ethics, so we'll get to it, you guys. We'll get there. Could a holographic lung work? For those of you who've seen Voyager, there's an episode where a character loses a lung or loses both lungs and is dying, and the doctor, who is himself a hologram, replaces it with a holographic lung. You know, lungs are really complex, ventilators are really complex, and it would be incredibly difficult. But the doctor himself is a hologram. So let's just buy it, you know? Why not? Anyway. Here I'm going to go into some real life tech that I just picked a couple examples of things that I've heard about emerging in the field that I would say approach sci-fi. And then I have a picture of like a real robotic prosthetic that for the hand to compare to Luke Skywalker's. So here we have a robotic prosthetic. It's just a Google image of what they can look like when they're pretty high tech and interesting. So these, I'm trying to think. I don't know what level of amputation the owner of this prosthetic had. I would guess it was below the elbow, because that's when if you have the forearm, that's where your muscles that control your fingers are. So you can still control the fingers of a device just by having like sensors on your forearm that picks up the nerve impulses of what muscles you're moving, and then it's similar to just moving your hand if you had a hand. But could something like this be used to fight? Because I see a lot of people with robotic arms pounding each other in movies. Not yet could they be used to fight, because they are fragile and expensive and tech is still developing. But one day, could we have people who've lost arms be pounding each other with their robotic arms? You know, maybe one day. But like, I don't know. There'd have to be a special budget for that kind of thing in the military. It's just a lot to think about. Okay, so this is CRISPR gene editing. I will say I don't know as much about CRISPR as I wanted to know prior to this morning, but I'll go into it a little bit. This is just a picture, a little illustrative picture. CRISPR is an acronym. You have what it stands for right there. Clustered, regularly, interspaced, short, palindromic, repeat. Which sounds like technobabble, doesn't it? Basically what it is CRISPR is technology that can go into the genome, into your DNA, and swap out like a couple letters, I think is the technology we have now. And if you swap out the right letters, you can get different proteins being made, which then produces different results in the body. I've heard that they've tried this in vivo, meaning in living people, and it has worked. It's still very cutting edge and not a ton is known about side effects and various other things. But I was just thinking again about Star Trek Voyager, and I have forgotten what they're called because I have a lovely brain. But it's that race that takes other races' organs and then steals them and then converts them so they're compatible with themselves and then implants them. And so they're fighting this disease this way by like stealing organs all the time. So yeah, I feel like depending on, well, the disease might just keep attacking their genes, you know, I don't know what the disease is, but like, if you think of like CRISPR technology, like going after the genome, that would be a menacing Star Trek villain right there. So that's why I have this note about a better alternative. It's kind of like tongue in cheek, you guys. There's a lot of ethic considerations when you talk about editing the genome, because you get into questions of like, did God make us this way on purpose? Are we messing with God's design? Or are we just fixing a disease the same way we fix different diseases all the time? If it's a genetic disease, like God didn't make disease, right? So what, you know, I'm not an ethicist, so I don't want to poke that too much, but if you have any specific questions, feel free to ask them and I will do my best to answer them about CRISPR and similar gene technologies. Also, my mom would be great to talk about this because she's a molecular biologist and probably knows more. Just saying, Mom. So this is a nod to what I do, advanced life support in the home setting. Life support, I've always thought is incredibly vague because there's a lot of different ways your life is supported. It is an actual like term people use though, so I just called it advanced life support for the benefit of like, this is medical technology without which the people who use it would die. So we have two images here. On the left is an image of TPN setup, TPN being total parenteral nutrition. That just stands for all the nutrition you're getting IV. It's usually for people with have short gut syndrome. So they have, for one reason or another, had their guts removed surgically because they were diseased or there was an accident and they got like cut out. You know, there's a horrible girl there was an accident in a hot tub. Not a horrible girl, a horrible accident in a hot tub involving a pediatric patient. And yeah, I've heard about that patient. Yeah, don't sit on jet, basically. Anyway, on the right is a ventilator. This is an elderly patient using a ventilator, but you can also see in her neck, she has a tracheostomy, which is how the ventilation is delivered to her lungs, because it's best delivered via a tube that goes into the body, which is invasive. You can deliver some level of ventilation through a mask that goes out of your face, you know, think Darth Vader, but it doesn't look like Darth Vader though. It looks totally different than Darth Vader. But if we're talking about what kind of breathing apparatus Vader had, he didn't have a trach. I can guarantee you he didn't have a trach. Anyway, so she's connected to a ventilator. You can see there's various filters along the way. There's a blue one that's kind of by her jacket, and there's a white. It's actually I think it's an ABO filter. Or am I calling it the wrong thing? It's an antibacterial filter that is next to the ventilator there. I work with vents, so I know a lot about them. I don't know what brand she's using, but I want to guess Trilogy. I don't know. I'm just trying to read it. I'm joking. There's like three major home health ventilator brands, so it's not hard to guess. Yeah, so these are two, and I think it's because like you think about TPN, just to give you a little idea of it, and then that's on the left side, you see there's the bag of the IV fluids, and then the jar it's no longer done in a jar, but the lipids, that's the white, it's the fat. So you're getting all three of your macronutrients, which are your fats, your sugars, your proteins, and proteins are delivered as amino acids when they're delivered via IV. You're getting all that in an IV mixture that is given, has to be given centrally. It cannot be given in a peripheral IV, which means an IV that's on a limb. It has to be given to an IV that goes to the heart, whether that be a PICC line, a peripherally inserted central line, which is like a tube that gets put into your arm, but then the tube is not woven. The tube is inserted and goes all the way through the veins into your heart, or you could just have it like a tunneled into your heart, surgically placed central line. There's other options too for central lines. or centrally inserted IVs. There's ports, there's various other things, but you see there's a complicated setup here for both TPN and lipids. There's a filter to catch any air bubbles because you don't want air in the vein that's causing air embolism. There's vitamins that have to be injected, and that's what the syringe there is for. Batteries for the pumps because these things run on batteries. Yeah. So, but it's the idea that like in sci-fi we have characters who have to recharge sometimes, like plug in, and this is a similar thing. This is just like plugging into your nutrition, but it has to be at least 12 hours a day, depending on what you're prescribed for, depending on how your liver's doing various things. There's a lot of side effects with TPN. It's really hard on the liver. Ventilation, home mechanical ventilation. I think I've already talked enough about that. I'll take any questions about that. Yeah, I tried to find some statistics about the average age of people who use this technology, because a surprising amount of them are children, and that's both for ventilation technology and then TPN. But I couldn't find any specific statistics about how many are children. There's a lot of muscular dystrophy can lead to ventilator use, which is a common cause. So yeah, I just want to say that sometimes I think about my job and I'm like, this is pretty sci-fi. I work with a child who has no intestines. That's crazy. Anyway. So here's another note. This is sort of, I kind of titled it a note for writers, just to give you like some perspectives I have as a nurse working closely with people with disabilities and who are medical technology dependent. For all mechanical body alterations, there are serious trade-offs and side effects in the real world. And you can explain some of that with technobabble in writing, but there's only so much you can explain away. Think back to the prosthetics and how I didn't buy those arms. They just need to be removable. I'm not saying you can't have a cool prosthetic that you use to fight. I'm just saying it's gotta come off at night or something. Like residual limbs swell, residual limbs like do all sorts of fun things, you know, and it's just they itch. I don't know, it's crazy. And then another note, this is going back to Luke Skywalker's hand in the very first, I think it was the very first picture I showed. His prosthetic hand that doesn't look like it's fake at all. That's nice, but you want to like, does it ring true that it's like perfect healing and there's not even like a scar? There's no inconvenience. That's why I like in How to Train Your Dragon, in the second one, there's a scene where Hiccup is trying to follow after someone who's climbing up some rocks, and Hiccup is struggling to climb up those rocks because of his missing foot. So and Toothless of course helps him climb the rocks. So it's like you could miss that moment in the movie really quickly. But it's nice to know that like, oh, you know, humans are not invincible, and I think that's the universal truth. And there are of course fantasy races and sci-fi aliens and things and like stuff. You can make a different allegory, but representation matters, and it's important to write true things. I'm gonna check I'm getting on time. All right, I got some time. So here's my big question of the presentation, which I really want to hear your thoughts. In what ways do sci-fi and advancing medical tech, so that is both sci-fi technology and the things I talked about, like CRISPR, robotic prosthetics, being able to live without intestines, things like that, how does that call on us as Christians? I want us all to think about that for a little bit, because this is a conference on the intersection of faith and fandom. So how is it calling us as Christians? What are we called to do? And I actually took this to adoration, which is a Catholic form of prayer where you pray in front of the Eucharist, as it's exposed in a monstrance, which is like a big golden stand with some radio lines. It's really beautiful. And I was praying about this because I was really blocked on what to do with this talk. And I was like, I don't know what to do. I feel like I'm not talking about ethics at all, which is so true, you guys. But I was like, I want to answer this question. In what ways do sci-fi and advanced medical tech call us as Christians? And of course, whenever I hear any sort of answer from God, it's always very short and to the point. So here we go, you guys. Nope, it's not there. It's the wrong slide, you guys. We'll get to oh my gosh. So sci-fi does, wait, I want to get to the slide. How does calling us as Christians? It calls on us to be charitable. Okay. That's all God said to me, you guys. Okay, here we go. Back a little bit. I'm sorry, I forgot what order my presentation was in. That's embarrassing. Sci-fi sometimes inspires reality, you guys. Here's a funny example, which is the communicator from the original Star Trek series, and then a flip Motorola phone. We can't say there's a causation, not just like correlation there. You know, you can't say that like someone watched Star Trek and was like, I'm gonna make that thing. But also you can, because when I was Googling for the communicators from Star Trek, I got like a bunch of replicas that are Bluetooth enabled that you can just buy. And I was like, this is cool. So we don't have Bacta yet in medicine, but the new discoveries are constantly pushing us forward. And I'm not going to say Bacta is right around the corner because it's made from barley and a bunch of alien stuff. But like medicine looks radically different today than it does 30 years ago. The children I care for, who are like, one uses a ventilator some of the day and the other one is on TPN, they could not have survived. The TPN patient specifically, he could not have survived even like 5 years ago if he was born, because the technology just wasn't there yet. It was just the TPN was so hard on the liver. It would prolong life, yes, but you would have a shorter life because of it, because you would need a liver transplant before too long. Things like that. So medical technology is always advancing. I work with a cutting edge home ventilator, and it's really cool and fun sometimes, just to think about like all the things it can do, smaller, more compact, easier to carry, that like older ventilators. So like Astral's the newest one, Trilogy is a little bit older, and then like LTV was, I think, the first home ventilator, and they were like dinosaur kind of like computery sized things. They were just the best they could do. But also there's this lack of integration between medical tech sometimes and just like tech that's accessible to consumers. Like I think about, you might be familiar with the baby monitor. What is it called? It's like Owlet or something, like the Owlet baby monitor. It's a pulse oximeter. So it measures the oxygen concentration of your blood, and then it can alert you if your baby is like a little bit apneic, or apneic meaning not breathing as much as they should, or not breathing at all. So it'll alert you to that for your newborn. Some apnea is normal in newborns, but not more than 20 seconds. I remember learning that in nursing school and being like, it's okay for baby stop breathing, but only if it stops breathing for 20 seconds. Anyway, but Owlet monitors are like so small, and the pulse oxes that I work with in the medical setting are like these big old boxes that show you the number and the pulse and the oximeter reading, and then it's like this little thing, and it's like a big wire thing. It's like we could do that Bluetooth, so there's no cord that the baby's pulling and messing with and pulling off their foot, and we could do that like so much better. We just need to, like, I don't know, have the Bluetooth people talk to the hospital people. I'm not saying in the hospital setting you might not want it because maybe Bluetooth is too complicated, or pairing would be an issue, or it'd be like too much tech. But in the home setting, think how great it would be. Yeah. I think my headphones, they're Bluetooth. They have customizable noise cancellation levels, and they're Bose. Bose has done a lot of work, and frankly, you can adjust how loud the world is by adjusting the noise cancellation. And it's like, does this work better than a hearing aid? Like, shouldn't the hearing aid people talk to the Bose people? Because they're doing similar things. I just think about that sometimes. We should just all talk to each other. And so here's a big point that I want to make. Medical tech is advancing, which I've talked about a lot. And what could once kill you is now survivable, but nearly always with the caveat that it changes you. Sometimes these changes are disabilities. So if to think about the world like, say, a really long time from now, 100 years from now, you think about the prominence of disability today and how we are preventing a lot of disabilities. Like 80% of blindness is preventable. That's why there's not as many blind people. Like they're not as common because we can prevent the blindness because we have like opticians and glasses and all sorts of great things that preserve eye function. Which also, that's a great statistic, you guys. 80% of blindness is preventable. Keep your eyes checked. Um, and so I just think about like, I was trying to look ton down that statistic on the average age of onset of ventilator use just to see if it was more common in pediatric or adult patients. I think it's more common in adult patients, but I couldn't find a statistic for sure. But they were all saying that home ventilator use is just climbing exponentially. And there's so many other diagnoses that are going like increasing a lot. We're becoming more aware of the ways the human body, not just the way the human body works, but also the way the human body malfunctions and disease processes and how to diagnose and treat them effectively. So there's just to think about the 100 years from now, that exponential increase, is something going to stop it? Are we going to find Bacta and cure everything? I don't know. Like, it's just thinking about the world of Star Trek and what's missing from it, you know? But also like it's Gene Roddenberry's vision, right? So it's okay that he didn't include that. It's just I like to think about a sci-fi world that is a little bit more like still has that tech magic element to it, but is a little bit more in like catering to what the human experience really is. I guess sometimes I think about that. And so I want to talk to you about it on a lovely Saturday morning. So I already showed you this slide. How did this call on us as Christians? This, like everything I've talked about it, whether it be CRISPR or sci-fi prosthetics or Bacta, how does it call on us as Christians? How does all the advances in technology, how do they call on us? And I already spoiled this for you guys. It calls on us to be charitable. Yeah. But what does that mean? What does that mean? What does that mean to be charitable? To love your neighbor as yourself. It's like a lot going on here, you guys. It's just a lot to unpack. So this is the last slide, so we'll have a lot of time for questions. I didn't go into ethics a lot, which I'm sorry that I should have like updated the profile on my talk so it wasn't just talking about, didn't sound like I was just talking about ethics, because I'll be honest, I wanted to talk about ethics so bad. I wanted to really like hit the theme on the head, hit the nail of the theme on the head with a hammer. But I just am not great at telling people how to be, like, not telling people how to be ethical. I'm fine at that. But like, I'm not great at, what is it? Like standing up there and being like, oh, this is how you do things, you know, when you're ethical and good. Because I just feel like there's not really a rule book for how to do that. And we talked about that. There's no algorithm for ethics or morality, I think was what it was. So that's why I have a slide here that says ethics on a case-by-case basis, because I really think, especially when talking medical ethics, you really have to take a lot of things into account. And also as a nurse, my experience working, like I took a class that was sexual and ethical medical morality at Franciscan. We all called it sexy med because sexual and ethical medical morality is a mouthful. And sexy med is funny. And I learned all about how to be ethical in a secular world, as a nurse, like things you can and can't do as a Catholic nurse, all this sort of stuff. And I don't even know where my notes are from that. I honestly follow my gut a lot of the time. And I know the teachings. I'm just not great at pontificating on them, which is fine because I'm not a pontificate. Yeah, and then this line is probably confusing all of you. Don't be a film student who thinks O2 by nasal cannula is life support and makes an edgy film about it. That's something I saw at Franciscan. It was end of life issues, which I can discuss in brief. Basically, that when you have someone who is, say, on a ventilator, never going to come off of it, and their lung function is decreasing slowly, do you remove the ventilator, like remove ventilation from them so that they can pass like naturally? Like, what do you do? And there's a lot of things to consider. And as a nurse, my experience has always been that you go with the family's wishes and you don't muddle in what they want. You don't go and preach to them and be like, oh, you know what, the Catholic Church teaches this about end of life issues. You just say, you focus on keeping their family member comfortable and you do everything you can. But that's a difficult and personal decision and things like that. And also, it's not one of those things that the Catholic Church teaches you can't ever remove someone from a ventilator. That's not what the Catholic Church teaches. We have some teachings about the specifics of the circumstance. Like if there's a possibility for recovery, you can hold out for that. But there's not but I'm talking about specifically cases where there's not the possibility for recovery, and it's really tragic. But I saw a student film when I was at Princeton that was showed in one of the student gathering spaces as like a come to this cool film about end of life issues. And I was like, yeah, cool, that's related to my nursing stuff. But the person who made it, I'm pretty sure they either never talked to a doctor or a nurse about what life support actually looks like, or just talked to one, disagreed with what I said, and then just didn't care and made their own film the way they wanted to. Because this person was in a coma, but all this person in a coma needed was not even IV access. They didn't even need that. They just needed O2 by nasal cannula. And that's what they treat as if it was life support. And like, that is like not life support, you guys. That's like oxygen in the air, and you're just supplementing it with a little bit of extra oxygen. Also, it was a nasal cannula, right? Which means it's not super high flow oxygen, because you need a mask if you're going like really high up there in oxygen concentrations that you're providing to the patient. I'm sorry if I'm getting too medical speaky. I'm trying to tone it down, but it's my training. So then the idea was that there was this priest, and he got a vision from the person who was in the coma and dying. Don't let them take me off life support. I want to live. And so this priest was doing all these crazy things and ignoring the family's wishes, and like wheeling the bed with a coma patient in and away, and like hiding him in closets. Like, it was like insane. It was like crazy. And it was basically a very edgy film. And I guess it worked for opening the discussion about end of life issues, because I'm discussing it now. But it was very medically inaccurate, because they had to give like epinephrine, and he didn't already have IV access, and they just like put it in a little syringe and then like insert it into like, I guess, a vein. That's not how it works. You have to establish IV access, and everybody in the hospital already has IV access. If you can't get IV access, you go to the bone. Like, it's crazy. But it was just nuts. Anyway, medical ethics can get complex. I'm no expert in them, as you can tell. But yeah, let's discuss. I see there's some questions in the Q&A. This is the last slide. I have citations. I looked at a bunch of PubMed journals, you guys, and then there's a Wikipedia citation right there. It's not a bibliography. It's just some websites, you guys. Okay, so I'll stop sharing my screen, and we'll get back to it.
Would you mind sharing some of those links and stuff in the chat?
I can. They're not all relevant, because like I think 6 of them are about the ventilators. Okay. And random things about ventilators. And I didn't talk that much about ventilators. It was like I was just saving what I was researching in the citations. So I can come back to it later. But I can definitely share the Bacta stuff, because it's interesting, the technobabble and everything.
Okay.
And I think there weren't a lot of scholarly articles that like I dove really deep into, because I was hunting for a cystic and never found it.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah. And I just saved all the articles. So it looks like there's a lot more research in this than, I mean, 4 years of nursing school is a lot of research.
It is.
So,
yeah. Well, I'll go through the questions if you want. Father Jacob asked, would you be comfortable sharing your experience and observations on the availability of medical tech? This is something that some recent dystopian movies have explored. The movie Elysium, I was thinking of that too, Father Jacob, about the availability of medical technology.
Yeah, so it's not equal by any means, right? Like patients in like the Western world have like great access, but then if you go to like remote areas, in even just remote areas in America, like if you go to like Native American reservations and things, like sometimes there's just not enough medical access out there. So it's not equally distributed. So you do get the issue of like we don't have enough ventilators. Like we heard all about that during the pandemic. I have not worked in a hospital since I was a student, so but I can still answer this question. Observation of availability of medical tech. So yeah, COVID's been rough. It knocked out a couple of supply chains that have affected my patients, and that's such a small impact when you think about it. But it's also huge because people depend on their IV tubing, and suddenly Casbolus tubing is no longer being produced anywhere, and they have to switch pumps because of it. It's scary. it's like, what if the curl and tubing goes out? That's what they switched to. And this is something every home health patient at like Seattle Children's is dealing with. Like, it was a huge swap. It was massive. So supply chain issues have been big. There's definitely a need for equal access to medical care. And that's a big part of that's just where people live. Availability of medical tech. Yeah, it's definitely, the patients I take care of have really good insurance and they're very lucky. If you don't have insurance, you have to make a lot of difficult decisions if your kid needs TPN or ventilator support, because these machines are expensive. And it's just, you might have to go into debt, in America with things like that. And then of course there's other countries. I think at least it went around Catholic circles a lot. I don't know if it went around other circles, but there was a child who was on I want to say he was on a ventilator. He was a NICU patient, and so he was neonatal. He was a newborn, and I want to say it was British government didn't want to cover his medical bills, and so they were opting to withdraw care from him, and his family wanted to fly him out of the country because they wanted to save his life. And that's a difficult thing, and because you get to the questions of like, well, the medical care has, like, we need to provide care to everyone as best as we can. Are we doing that? Or are we cutting corners for the sake of keeping our profits in line, or whatever it is? I don't know enough about like British healthcare systems to know exactly what the like motivations were, but it didn't sound good. They simply wanted to withdraw care from a small child. And it gets tricky too, because you get to the questions of prognosis, which can vary a lot between doctors. Like, one doctor might say your kid can live and live a good life. Another doctor might say, no, your kid's going to have a poor quality of life. And if those doctors are at odds, like, that's very confusing for the family. Like, that happened with one of the families I work with. They had their child was in surgery, and I'm going to try not to go into details, but the surgeon asked the mom if she would let the patient, like, if she'd be comfortable with letting her son pass away that day, if the surgeon withheld care, or the surgeon could save his life, but he would be disabled. And of course, mom was like, get in there and save my son's life. And the surgeon did. But like, this is like, there's ableism across, like, in a lot of medical professionals, unfortunately. So it's a challenging thing, and a lot of people don't understand. Like, my patients, maybe one of them on IV tubing, connected to IV tubing, like, was it 19 hours a day, and the other one half an hour is on a ventilator, but they have great, amazing, fulfilling lives. And it is not any able-bodied person's place to say that a disabled life is not worth living. That's definitely like an ethical issue I feel very comfortable speaking on.
Yeah, that was really good.
Yeah, I have just read the follow-up observation. Yeah, so I hope we're heading toward a Star Trek future and not as much a Firefly future. Yeah, so I don't know. It's just interesting to think about where things are going, right? And there's a lot of speculation. I've only been a nurse. I've been an RN 3.5 years. It'll be 4 soon, but not that soon. So I haven't seen as much as some other nurses have seen, for sure. But yeah, it's definitely lots to think about.
Yeah, I mean, access to care just hits such a lot of notes. A lot of notes.
Yeah. It's difficult. Yeah. I mean, I take medication every day. I've had to like fight my insurance company to cover the medication I've been on for years, and be like, okay, do you want me in the hospital? No, you don't. You don't want to pay that bill. So just cover my meds. Right. Exactly. Yeah. Something I feel like the American healthcare system has been at a breaking point for a long time, and something's got to change. And I don't know what needs to change, but it's not working as is, unfortunately. It's like there are good things about the American healthcare system. I don't want to just like drag it. Like, we have a lot of advanced technology, and we have we have some things that are available in our country that are not available in other countries, but also just the cost of care is like insane. Like,
Is
why
that
is it so
astronomical?
expensive?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So somebody wrote in the Discord chat, I think a lot of what I'm thinking about with your talk is our moral duty to be aware of what medical options are out there so we can make informed choices for us and our loved ones.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I know that universal healthcare doesn't like solve everything, but I do wonder if it's been a very long time since I've lived in Canada, so but I do wonder if it's helped with accessibility to that care, to advanced medical care.
Yeah. A bunch of the articles I wound up researching on the ventilator side of things were actually, a couple of them were Canadian. So I could just share my whole citation list, the Wikipedia one being the one I use most in the current form of the presentation. But if anybody wants to read an abstract about an article about home mechanical ventilation, or read 6 of them, like that, I did that,
right.
You're all welcome. I'll put them in the
that'd be great. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then
they're not cited well, so I don't remember what each of them are, but
yeah. And it's Father Jacob also said so many folks are overwhelmed or don't even realize they have options beyond what's told or not told to them. So that really kind of gets into the question too of medical advocacy and how do we advocate for ourselves, which I think is an ethical issue too, like what's being told to us, what's not being told to us. And so yeah, I don't know if that's a question we can answer right now, but but this is really good.
I'm thinking about it. Yeah, because there's so much, right, about like just personal bias that can go into a single doctor's decision, and they might just not know. Like that, I'm talking about that, like that surgeon at Seattle Children's who offered to the mom, I could just stitch your son up with his necrotic bowel, his like dying intestines inside of him, and he would pass away. Would you prefer that to a life on TPN? That's not, first of all, that is an okay question to ask him. Like he left surgery to ask this question, let's be clear. So that is like not okay. But it's like that's some ableism there, and that's not good, and that's some bias. And I don't know if medical professionals, we have a lot against us. Like burnout's been a problem like since well before the pandemic even stepped into the room. So it's just worse now. And like pay has gone up, but burnout is not getting any better, because it's like, I've gotten phone calls because I was looking for a different job for a while. I like left and came back to my work as a pediatric home health nurse for a little while, because I learned that it's kind of nice and that other work is rough. I worked in a nursing home for like 8 weeks and just burned out like so fast, because it was just exhausting and there was not enough to go around. Like, and when I say not enough, I mean not enough nurses to go around.
Right.
So I just had to like get myself out of there and like jump ship. I felt like every day the nursing home was going to be on fire when I came in, because it was just so understaffed. Yeah. So it was just stressful, and I had to ultimately just be like, I need to step away from this. But also you talk about like personal responsibility and like what can we do to help the situation, and like working in a place that's understaffed does help a little bit. But also if they're not solving their staffing issues by retaining staff by raising their wages to a competitive level, like it's difficult. Yeah. So
people who aren't well rested and stuff can't give you the best care.
Oh yeah, like I was right? It was so bad. Yeah. So I wonder about like doctors and nurses getting jaded from all the stuff they see every day, and that fueling some decisions, like for example that surgeon. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Well, it's 11:30, so we can probably wrap up. Well, everybody, thank you for joining us today at Rose's Talk. Thank you, Rose, so much. That was really, really interesting. And you brought up such good questions that we're probably going to be continuing to talk about in the chat. in the Discord. So we'd love to see your citations if you would
I
like
will
to
work
drop
on
them
getting
there.
that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. And so this is actually our lunch break. So we will reconvene at 12:30 and order DoorDash or whatever, go fixing something or whatever. But we hope to see you again in an hour. And thank you again, Rose.
I have a question for the participant. Will there be social time on the Discord or anything, like in
Yes.
the voice chat?
Absolutely. So we
Okay.
can go into the voice channels. We can go into like our intros and bio and do some just general hanging out. So there are 3 voice channels, just so people know. There are 2 voice channels available. One is just a general chat and one is for help. So if you need some in-person troubleshooting, we can do that there. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks everybody so much. And
thank you all.
All right. We'll see you in the chat and or in an hour.